Good afternoon. You're watching Anewz. I'm Dilek Tuna. These are the top stories. Houthis released the footage of Eternity Sea ship sinking in the Red Sea. US President Donald Trump has said he considers sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine. The European Court of Human Rights rules Russia violated international law in Ukraine and is responsible for the downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. A surge in attacks in the Red Sea has left one cargo ship sunk, another damaged, and several crew members dead or missing. The Eternity Sea was hit with missiles and sea drones before sinking off Yemen's coast. The United Nations Security Council say they agree on the importance of avoiding a deeper regional crisis.
Yemen's Houthi forces have claimed responsibility for sinking the Greek-operated, Liberian-flagged cargo vessel Eternity Sea, in which 4 people died and 14 remain missing. 7 were rescued out of a 22-member crew and a security team of 3 after spending more than 24 hours in the sea. Houthi forces released dramatic footage of what they claim to be the ship before it slipped beneath the surface, leaving behind a slick of oil and debris. They say the vessel had violated a ban on dealings with Israeli ports and ignored repeated warnings. Their spokesman said the attack involved an unmanned boat and 6 missiles. He also claimed their naval unit had rescued some crew members and taken them to safety, though this could not be independently verified.
The Yemeni armed forces affirm they will continue to prevent Israeli navigation in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. They renew their warning to all companies dealing with the ports of occupied Palestine that their ships and crews will be targeted in any area within the reach of the armed forces, regardless of the ship's destination.
The vessel was attacked with sea drones and rockets fired from speedboats on Monday and Tuesday, reportedly by Houthi forces. Lifeboats were destroyed, leaving the crew vulnerable. By Wednesday morning, the ship had sunk southwest of Yemen's Hodeidah port. Greek maritime security firm Diaplos, involved in the rescue, released footage showing the survivors being pulled from the water. Eternity Sea is the second ship attacked this week by the Iran-aligned group, after a 7-month-long lull in hostilities. The attack on the Magic Seas on the 6th of July also resulted in the ship sinking, but all crew were rescued. The United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, warned the Security Council of growing military escalation, including Israeli strikes on Yemeni ports in response.
Yemen must not be drawn deeper into regional crises that threaten to unravel the already extremely fragile situation in the country. The stakes for Yemen are simply too high, and I recognize that for some, on both sides of the conflict, the appetite for a military escalation remains. A military solution, however, remains a dangerous illusion that risks deepening Yemen's suffering.
This comes as Hamas has agreed to release 10 captives in Gaza after talks in Qatar between Israel and Hamas have stalled for a ceasefire. More than 70 people in Gaza were killed on Wednesday.
Hopes for a Gaza ceasefire are fading as Israel and Hamas have hit a fresh impasse after days of talks in Doha. For more on that, we go to Tel Aviv and our Trent Murray.
Well, despite cautious optimism earlier in the week that Israel and Hamas may have been close to agreeing to a ceasefire, that optimism now seems to be abating as both sides appear once again to be at an impasse after 5 days of negotiations in the Qatari capital, Doha. Now, we understand that the basic framework for a temporary ceasefire is there. That basic framework includes a temporary 60-day cease to hostilities, with Israel withdrawing from key military positions within the Gaza Strip. In exchange, Hamas willing to hand over 10 Israeli living hostages, as well as the bodies of 18 deceased ones. But that is where things stand right now, and we understand both sides are having concerns about what happens after that 60 days ends. Hamas would like to see Israel withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip, but the Israeli position is that they want to maintain some sort of security still within Gaza in order to prevent Hamas rearming. Now, we got some clues potentially into where things stand right now. Earlier today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking on Fox Business News, said he thinks that there is a good chance that there will be a ceasefire, but he acknowledged the main sticking point is the deployment of IDF troops after the 60 days comes to an end. We also heard, though, from the country's foreign minister, Gideon Zar, who is visiting Slovakia. Now, he has said that Israel is willing, after a temporary ceasefire is agreed, to negotiate a permanent one, but he also said that Hamas is holding 50 Israeli hostages and that the entire war can end tomorrow if those hostages are handed over and Hamas lays down its weapons. So while those negotiations are taking place, of course, both publicly in the media in some ways, but also privately in Doha, what we are seeing in Gaza is that the IDF is actually looking to increase the tempo of its military operations. We've heard in the past few hours that they have said they are placing additional troops into an area around Beit Hanun in the very north of the Gaza Strip, near the northern border fence. They say they are doing that after 5 Israeli soldiers were killed by a roadside bomb planted by Hamas, 14 others injured. The IDF position is that they believe large numbers of Hamas militants are holed up in tunnels there, and they're sending in additional troops to the area with an expected increase in fighting to come. Trent Murray for Anewz, Tel Aviv.
The Israeli military says it intercepted a missile launched from Yemen, triggering air raid sirens in Tel Aviv. The Houthi group, which controls the most populous areas of Yemen, has been targeting Israel and attacking shipping lanes. Most of the dozens of missiles and drones launched by the Houthis have either been intercepted or fallen short. The Houthis say their attacks are acts of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has met with US President Donald Trump in Washington to push forward a potential deal with Hamas, focused on securing the release of hostages and achieving a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Joining us is Mr. Ilan Sialom. He's a geopolitical analyst and the founder of the Observatory of the Abraham Accords. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, how close are Israel and Hamas to finalising the proposed hostage release and ceasefire deal?
Well, we're seeing cautious optimism. Hamas recently agreed to release 10 hostages as part of a proposed 60-day truce. So this deal includes a phased release of captives in exchange for increased humanitarian aid in Gaza and the release of Palestinian prisoners. Israel has shown some flexibility, particularly regarding partial troop withdrawal and agreeing to international funding for Gaza reconstruction. The US Special Envoy Witkoff hopes the deal can be finalized before the end of the week. But however, these are indirect talks and the situation remains fluid.
Okay, and what are the remaining sticking points preventing an immediate agreement?
Well, very good questions. I think there are 3 main obstacles today. The first one is the permanence of a ceasefire. So this is the biggest hurdle. Hamas demands a definitive end to the war and a full Israeli withdrawal. And Israel insists on retaining the option to resume military operations if its security is threatened. So the current proposal aims to bridge this by having talks on a permanent ceasefire during the temporary truce. This is the first point. The second one is the humanitarian aid. Hamas emphasized the need for an unrestricted flow of aid into Gaza. While Israel has shown some flexibility on aid, the extent and modalities of withdrawal, especially concerning strategic corridors, are still contentious. And the third point, and I think this is the biggest one, this is the trust and guarantees. There is a deep lack of trust between actors. Hamas wants real guarantees for lasting peace, while Israel fears Hamas could drag out negotiations indefinitely. So the role of international guarantors is crucial, but concrete enforcement mechanisms are still being worked out.
Okay, and what role is the United States playing in mediating the talks, particularly through its envoy to Doha?
Well, the US, since the beginning, is playing a central and highly active role as a mediator. working closely with Qatar and Egypt. The President Donald Trump is personally invested in these negotiations, pushing for a deal to be finalized. The Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, is a key figure in Doha. He's actively involved in the proximity talks, conveying messages and trying to bridge the gaps between Israeli and Hamas positions. Since many days now, the US has reportedly been pressing Israel to ease its stance on issues like troop withdrawal and aid distribution. So the American goal is to secure a deal that leads to a lasting peace in Gaza and a return to all hostages. But I want to say something else. Let's not forget that President Trump declared many times during his campaign that as a president, he could easily end a conflict like the one in Ukraine and in Gaza. So situation remains blocked in Ukraine, but on Israeli-Hamas conflict, he put much more pressure on both actors, especially since the successful Israeli-US campaign in Iran. Why? Because it could be a real political achievement for him, for the Trump administration. But the coming days will be crucial.
Okay, Ilan, thank you so much for joining the program today. US President Donald Trump has said he will consider sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine just days after the United States suspended arms deliveries over concerns about depleting its own stockpiles. Trump said the US would provide more weapons to Ukraine, primarily defensive, to help the war-torn country fend off intensifying Russian advances. His comments come as Russia launched its largest aerial assault on Ukraine to date on Tuesday night, firing 728 drones and 13 missiles in a nationwide overnight attack, according to Ukrainian authorities.
They would like it. They've asked for it. They're very rare indeed, because a lot of systems have been sent to Ukraine. But they would like to. I know they made the request. We're going to have to take a look at it.
In a significant ruling, Europe's top human rights court has held Russia responsible for the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which killed all 298 people on board. The court also declared that Moscow has systematically violated international law in Ukraine since 2022.
Russia is directly responsible for the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, according to a unanimous ruling at Europe's top human rights court in Strasbourg. It marks the first time an international court has held Moscow accountable for the July 2014 tragedy that killed 298 people when it was shot down over eastern Ukraine, calling it a grave breach of international law. The court also says that Moscow failed to properly investigate the tragedy, withheld vital information, and inflicted further pain on the victims' families through years of denial.
The flight MH17 was fired by a member of the Russian military crew of the Buk-Taylor or by a member of the DPR. It was not necessary for the court to decide exactly who fired the missile, since Russia was responsible for the acts of the Russian armed force and of the armed separatists.
The court went further, saying that Russia has carried out systematic human rights violations across Ukraine, including indiscriminate attacks on civilians, summary executions, forced displacement, torture used as a weapon of war. The ruling also addressed that those rights violations are tied to the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. However, Moscow continues to deny responsibility for MH17 and claims it had no military presence in Ukraine in 2014.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations and China have concluded negotiations on a trade deal set to be signed later this year.
China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have reaffirmed efforts to strengthen economic cooperation during a meeting of the regional bloc's foreign ministers in Kuala Lumpur. Both sides have concluded negotiations on a new trade agreement, which is expected to be formally signed later this year.
We must remain vigilant to the threat to an open, fair and rule-based trading system. In this context, the signing of ASEAN-China Free Trade Area 3.0, scheduled for later this year, comes as an opportune moment. Through this agreement, ASEAN and China will be able to fortify our economic cooperation and resilience during these challenging times and beyond.
The ASEAN summit comes amid renewed concerns over US trade tariffs. US President Donald Trump recently announced steep levies of between 25% and 40% on 6 Southeast Asian countries, despite efforts by some to offer concessions and negotiate lower rates. ASEAN, a bloc of 10 Southeast Asian nations, is China's largest trading partner. According to Chinese customs data, total trade between the two reached $234 billion in the first quarter of 2025. As a group, the export-driven ASEAN is the world's 5th largest economy, with some member states benefiting from supply chain shifts out of China.
Markets showed resilience as tech gains helped offset fresh trade tensions. Investors remain watchful but optimistic, supported by signs that central banks may ease policy later this year. Overall, a cautious mood prevails across global markets today.
Asian stock markets saw modest gains on Thursday. The rise was helped by market optimism after US artificial intelligence chip designer Nvidia briefly became the world's first company to hit a $4 trillion valuation. The news boosted confidence in tech-related stocks, especially in Japan, where chip supplier Disco surged more than 4%. Meanwhile, investors showed little concern over US President Donald Trump's latest wave of trade threats. He announced new 50% tariffs on copper, starting on the 1st of August, and warned Brazil and several other smaller trading partners of similar penalties. Markets, however, largely brushed off the news, as many believe there's still room for negotiation and changes before any measures fully take effect. Asian markets had a mixed day on Thursday. China's CSI 300 rose 0.4%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 0.1%, while Japan's Nikkei fell by 0.6%. A broader index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan also gained 0.4%. In Europe, futures pointed to a calm start, with small gains in the Euro stocks and FTSE. In the US, the Federal Reserve signaled that interest rate cuts could be on the table later this year. Officials believe any price increases from tariffs are likely to be temporary, and the labour market remains strong. This has kept hopes alive for continued economic growth without a major downturn. The US dollar weakened slightly, especially against the euro and British pound, but stayed firm against the Japanese yen. Brazil's currency, however, dipped following Trump's tariff threats. In other markets, gold prices rose slightly. Oil prices dipped minimally, with Brent crude holding just above $70 a barrel and US crude trading a bit lower. Bitcoin hovered near record highs, reflecting cautious optimism across global investors.
A meeting between the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, is still underway in the city of Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. The talks aim to work on finalising a peace agreement. Our correspondent Katie Wilson brings us the update.
That's right, we're still here. We're still in the beautiful Emirates Palace here in Abu Dhabi, where the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia are undergoing direct peace talks. Now, we've been here all morning, and so have these leaders. And what we know so far is that the people in the room have switched up slightly throughout the morning. So the conversations started with delegations from both Azerbaijan and Armenia. But then the Prime Minister of Armenia and the President of Azerbaijan had the chance to speak one-on-one, but now the delegations are back in the room. So that's what we know so far about the conversations that have been taking place. And of course, we'll keep bringing you all of the latest updates as we find out more. What we knew ahead of these talks is that the Zangezur corridor and the opening of that corridor is likely to be on the agenda. And it's worth pointing out that this isn't about the signing of a peace agreement just yet. These are peace negotiations. Now, before that peace agreement can be signed, there is that sticking point in Armenia's constitution, which lays claim to Karabakh, which is internationally recognized territory of Azerbaijan. Now, that will need to be removed before Baku feels ready to sign a peace agreement. But what is significant is that these talks are happening, and they're happening directly. And this is something that analysts have picked up on. There isn't a third-party mediator here in these negotiations. The two leaders are talking one-to-one, and analysts hope that this will lead to a sincere conversation and long-term peace, in that it's not being filtered by a third-party mediator. We are here in the United Arab Emirates at the request of Azerbaijan, in that the UAE is a friendly country to Azerbaijan, but also has good relations with Armenia. It's a country that doesn't have prior invested interests between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Therefore, it's an unbiased host city. And we'll, of course, keep bringing you all of the latest developments as we know more as these talks continue.
The leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan have met in Abu Dhabi to push forward long-awaited peace talks aimed at resolving decades of conflict. Joining us is Tural Ganjali, a member of Parliament of Azerbaijan. Welcome to the program, Mr. Ganjali.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we've just gotten word that the meeting between the two leaders in Abu Dhabi has in fact concluded. How significant is this Abu Dhabi meeting in the context of previous informal and formal contacts between Pashinyan and Aliyev?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very important and historic meeting. Today is taking place in the United Arab Emirates in the city of Abu Dhabi. The process is being conducted completely in a bilateral format. This is very important to mention. The Abu Dhabi, the venue has been chosen because the United Arab Emirates is a friendly country to Azerbaijan, and the choice of location is just to provide a venue for the bilateral talks without the participation of any third party. And I think that we are looking forward for a positive outcome of this meeting. You know that after the war ended between Armenia and Azerbaijan, since 2020, the parties have been conducting peace negotiations almost for 5 years, and it's high time that we have achieved finally the peace treaty, signed a peace treaty and achieved the peace. And it was Azerbaijan initially who supported and initiated the peace process. Even it was Azerbaijan who has prepared the draft agreement of the peace treaty and submitted it to Armenia. So there are very high expectations from this meeting, and the very important aspect again is that this meeting is taking place completely on a bilateral format without participation of any third party, which means that we can do it, we can achieve and we can sign the peace treaty on a bilateral format without participation of any third countries. And of course, we are not going to see any agreement, any signing of peace treaty today. But this is a very important step forward, taking parties to the final step, signing peace treaty in the coming future, of course.
Okay, so you've underlined there that it's definitely the talks have been held in a bilateral format, but how are external actors like the US and Turkey influencing or perhaps supporting these negotiations?
In terms of supporting, yes, it is possible that Turkey or the United States or any third party can support, encourage parties to sign peace treaty in the coming future. But in terms of playing a role as a mediator, it's out of question, because the latest development of the peace process between the parties has demonstrated that the best format and the best method of negotiating peace with Armenia is just on a bilateral format. You know, in spite of being subjected to occupation and being victim of this process, Azerbaijan for 30 years has always supported the peace process, and even Azerbaijan has always been a proponent of having peace process completely on a bilateral format. And now we have unique opportunity to achieve it. And I think that, again, if any third party or any mediator would like to somehow positively contribute to the process, is just they can support the process without being actively involved in the process, because we know that sometimes, unfortunately, third parties or any so-called mediators may have their hidden agenda, may have their interests in the process, which would undermine, again, the fragile process because in Armenia, in internal situation, you know, this is very sensitive. That's why in the region overall, we have very complicated, obstructive geopolitical situation that compels us to conduct this process on a tete-a-tete format and to sign the peace treaty as soon as possible. And I think that the good remedy of doing some misunderstandings or violations committed by the Armenia for 30 years is to sign the peace treaty would be better result, or would be better outcome for the meeting that's taking place in Abu Dhabi today.
Okay, Mr. Ganjali, thank you so much for joining us today. Georgia's Prime Minister hosted Uzbekistan's Foreign Minister in Tbilisi to boost cooperation on trade, tourism and the strategic Middle Corridor. Nini Nicollesi reports from Tbilisi.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Qorbakidze met with Uzbek Foreign Minister Bakhtiar Saidov on July 8 in Tbilisi, the latest in the string of diplomatic efforts to strengthen ties between the two countries. The focus was on deepening economic cooperation with a particular attention to trade, tourism and connectivity projects. At the attention of the discussion was the Middle Corridor, an east-west transport route that bypasses Russia and connects Asia with Europe. With shifting global supply chains and geopolitical tensions, this corridor is gaining strategic weight. Georgia's geographic position gives it a key role, and according to the political expert Tornike Sharashenidze, this role carries even more weight for Georgia than for others in the region. The Middle Corridor is crucial for Georgia because Georgia does not have natural resources or wealth, so it is trying to use its geography and its own resources to the maximum in order to become the regional hub. Cooperation with both neighboring countries and the Central Asian states, including Uzbekistan, is necessary. The relations with China should also be considered so Georgia can receive as much economic benefit as possible. This will ultimately not only boost the economy but will also strengthen Georgia's security because the more useful small country is for major players, the more stable its position becomes, he said to Anewz. This meeting signals growing momentum in Georgia-Uzbekistan ties and reflects a wider push by Tbilisi to turn its strategic geography into long-term economic and political values. It's Nini Nicollesi reporting from Tbilisi, Anewz.
Afghanistan's Taliban authorities have flatly rejected arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for 2 of its senior officials, accused of crimes against humanity and systematically persecuting women and girls since seizing power in August 2021. Tamim Bahis has more in Kabul.
The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for 2 of Afghanistan's most senior leaders, Habatullah Khundzada, the country's supreme leader, and Abdulhakim Haqqani as Chief Justice. The ICC says there are reasonable grounds to believe the 2 men are responsible for crime against humanity since August 2021. The charges focus on gender and political-based persecution, including systematic violations of the rights of women and girls and those who opposed the country's gender policies. In a swift response, spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid rejected the ICC's authority, stating that Afghanistan does not recognize the court. He accused the ICC of double standards, citing what he called genocide in Gaza that continues unpunished. Mujahid said labeling Islamic Sharia law as unjust or oppressive is a direct insult to Muslim beliefs and an act of hostility toward Islam itself. The ICC says the warrants remain sealed to protect witnesses and victims, but made their existence public to help prevent further crimes. It has reaffirmed its calls for the arrest of Afghanistan's top leaders. Afghanistan's leadership maintains it is not bound by the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the court. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for Anewz.
Ankara has been selected as the tourism capital of the Turkic world for 2026. The decision was made at the 10th meeting of tourism ministers from the Organization of Turkic States, held in Ankara. Turkish Culture Minister Mehmet Nuri Ersoy said the title reflects the city's rich history, culture and its growing role in regional cooperation. A group of international travellers has set out on a unique journey to one of Azerbaijan's legendary industrial landmarks, oil rocks, the world's first offshore oil platform. Here's our special report from the Caspian Sea.
A vessel heading toward one of the most iconic and mysterious destinations in Caspian Sea, the world's first offshore oil platform, the oil rocks.
Located nearly 40 kilometers off the Azerbaijani coast, Oil Rocks was once a marvel of Soviet engineering. Built in 1949, it marked the beginning of offshore drilling as we know it.
This journey is a part of MTP Travelers Group program, which bringing 30 people from 14 countries.
For many of these explorers, it's their first time in Azerbaijan and their first encounter with a floating city powered by steel, oil, and stories of resilience.
Oil Rocks is quite an interesting place. Someplace like I've never seen before, and I've had a good time so far. I've really enjoyed, we went into the museum, and each one of the stops that we went to, each one of the monuments, we were given a good 3 to 5 minutes worth of information, and it was very helpful.
I mean, I generally understood where oil came from and everything, but it's so cool to come out and see it and actually get to see where people are staying and kind of how it's all done.
Once a groundbreaking feat of offshore construction, Oil Rocks today is a time capsule, a place where history, industry, and the open sea converge for travelers. It's a rare opportunity to step into a place that shaped the modern oil era, yet reminds of the radar of conventional tourism.
With rusted pipelines, endless bridges, and the smell of sea and fuel in the air, the platform tells a story that few get to witness firsthand.
Yeah, so the Oil Rocks, I had been here once before in 2021, and in my understanding, it's only the third time for tourists to come in like this. So I'm very happy to be here. It's impressive. It's very large.
Yeah, well, it's really cool seeing the first offshore oil pump in the world. So a very unique experience. And I understand not many tourists get to go here, so very lucky that we were able to.
In the middle of the Caspian, far from the usual postcard views, Oil Rocks continues to echo the pulse of Azerbaijan's oil legacy, now through the eyes of a new generation of global travellers.
And that's all we have for now from Baku. Stay tuned to A News for more updates.